Evolve towards this biological way of thinking with soft materials rather than hard materials. Soft materials are able to move in all directions, and they give you a hand. Oh, stop here. I shouldn't say stop here, but anyway. Here we put the electronic elements, the small, let me think, resistors and different kinds of small electronic pieces in a foam covering. The idea at the beginning, and actually throughout the whole process, was to set up the things around us so that they were unusually close to being soft, because we were working with what we called soft control material at the end. But our idea was that everything should be able to move and like a biological system and not like a hard piece of board. Because the more we could surround ourselves with this softness, the better. To change our thinking, to change our capacity to conceive of soft materials. Because we were trying to make a soft material that had some imitation of living materials. That is, it could move, but under controlled movement. And originally the idea was, could we make something which was like living material, simulated living materials, rather than being hard materials which had no relationship to the softness and the swelling and contracting and moving and in soft ways. That would be different and change our thinking, because we were struggling to get into a space which did not exist in our thinking, building soft materials which could expand and contract and be like living systems, like having a kitten in your arms or a dog that is alive. And these systems were not, of course, alive and were very primitive, but they needed to be in our minds, to change our minds from the hardness which surrounds us most of the time. Things made of wood and steel and the like. We were trying to move away from that in ourselves and in our capacity to think of how to make simulation to our things, and not even things, processes that were like living processes. We are not trying to make anything alive. We're simply trying to move away from the hard, heavy, straight things to things which were light and able to change shape, change color, change consistency. That was what we were trying to create in our minds and in our physical experience. Many rhythms we use in our bodies, and all living things are organized in terms of rhythms, which are the kinds of movements that are natural to us, so natural that we wouldn't even be aware of them, except that they're natural. And when you're paralyzed, then you become aware of the living movements, because you don't have them. So we are trying to get ourselves into a way of thinking that includes living simulation. This is important to us, and was important at the lab. So you can imagine that it was not easy to do anything which would take us into this territory. But we managed, and it was quite exciting.
So can you give an example of how rhythm and time were used as control mechanisms, or can you just give maybe example of an artifact or technology that you built that relied on that principle of timing?
Well, at the moment, if we go on in the film a little further, you will see what we developed after a while. But at the beginning, what we made seemed to be also pretty hard, because we didn't know how to make soft materials that were controllable. But in the other film, there we have some illustrations of soft material. For instance, we had a big block of foam, and that big block of foam had balloons in it, which could be blown up or reduced. And so we had this big block of foam, which is, I guess, about as big as me and would contain me. And then we could play with making this block of foam move. And I knew from previous inventions of mine that it was possible to make a block of foam move, and if it expanded, it would change color because it exposed other surfaces. And it wasn't anything mysterious to do that. That was easy. And this was my first invention, was playing with that sort of thing. And so this big block of foam helped us to think of how we would build something which was more delicate than that, because that was very crude. And so we were making, instead of the big balloons, small cells, which consisted of two flat pieces of thin foam, which were glued at the edges, you could say, but it wasn't glued actually, it was something else. But anyway, they were put together at the edges quite firmly, and they contained some freon, which was a fluid which was we were able to warm up a little bit, and suddenly we have a big fat pillow. What was before almost impossible, 2 layers of very thin plastic, and between the 2 layers of plastic was trapped or enclosed some freon, and then around the edges and covering all this plastic foam, plastic bubble, there was an element of warming. So that here we had something which became a pillow from being basically a flat membrane. And that expansion and contraction could be controlled. So we could make something big, and we could have many elements being expanded at once, or few elements at once. And so we had control of the consistency of the soft material and its expansion and contraction. And we called that soft control material, because the computer was controlling it. Computers in those days were not easy to deal with, but we managed nonetheless to make this expand and contract. Came from, but anyway, we began to play with television. We had several television cameras, and these cameras could be adjusted so that the images were quite different. Namely, the images were structured, but they were structured in a way that was much more musical, in the sense of repetitions of parts of the image, and very simple to do. We put the camera at an angle, and we had a loop, so the camera was taking a picture of itself, as it were. I don't think that's a good explanation. It was, I think Paul Ryan was to some degree involved with this. We learned that we could point the camera at the screen and make a loop. That's very important, because when we point the camera at the screen, then it was supposed to sort of blow up. It didn't, because it didn't. Nobody had done that before, as far as we were concerned. It wasn't Paul. I don't know whether he was the first one or not. But in any case, so we created a loop. And the power of loop was illustrated by this. And loops and feedback is essential to creating rhythmic activities in the loop that create images which are distorted, but at the same time maintain a consistency which can be very beautiful. So this again was something that we were using to understand loops.
Can you then at some point try looking at me?
Yeah.
See how
The lab, very different from ordinary environments. And we tried to make it as beautiful as we could, because we felt if we made it beautiful, then it's more likely that we can think new thoughts. And Sans was a member of our group, the only woman, who was an artist. And she fixed one wall. Instead of being a hard wall, she fixed it by hanging little squares of plastic, colored plastic, on a string. And when the light hit that, it made a wonderful panoply of colors which moved with any movement of the air, and which in a way sparkled lights. And they weren't sparkles really, they were sort of dots of light which were changing all the time according to the changes in the air and the movements in the air and so on. So again, we're working towards making a field around ourselves, which was a moving field rather than a solid wall.
And the design of the lab, was it...
Peter had made a pit, that is, a box, which he painted many colors. And of course this was in keeping with the whole hippie kind of affair. And in the box he put leather figures which he had made, because he had as much money as he wanted. And these leather figures were in unusual shapes. And when we were tired, we got into the box, and we came out of the box. Because you could lie in the box very comfortably and go to sleep if you needed to, or just be there and think. But we were thinking in a frame which was quite unusual and quite beautiful. And the whole place was quite beautiful. And eventually, I was in charge of the environment. And we took materials from factories that sort of were interesting, usually factory things which were where they'd punched out something and where it was a piece of something that would be ordinarily thrown away, but it had a nice texture and a nice shape, and we just hung it up from the ceiling. And in order to create an unusual environment for ourselves, so we wouldn't be structured by all the things around us that were not biological, but mechanical, and mechanical, flat and hard. So this was our effort to create something which would help us to move into a new way of thinking, a biologic way of thinking.
The question that I had, which might require a very brief answer, is to what extent the design of the lab reflected your own thinking about creativity? Because you've written quite a few articles also around that time about how you unlearn things, how new ideas come. So it was very much in line with your own thought about creativity, and you tried to build a lab for yourself where you could sort of experiment with your theories about creativity, or that wasn't that sophisticated?
Well, it was partly a matter of thinking of what we should make the lab into, but it was also partly it needed to be beautiful. And beautiful in my terms, I must admit. But the other people there were not so many, they seemed to feel their way into this too. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we even made things which were perhaps a little bit silly. But in terms of, if you were making an ordinary laboratory, it doesn't make much sense. But at the same time, they gave us an inner feeling. We could watch what we were thinking outside ourselves. And when I had a very good friend who was a head of the patent office for the whole of the United States. Now I had been sharing with him with a group of prominent people where we were experiencing trying to move into new thinking. And another person was the head of science, the governmental head of science for the United States. And I got really very tired of and upset by the fact that there was no real support to thinking new. So it was repetition of all of the old stuff and not building new structures and reacting to new structures in open ways. Instead, it was a disturbance that somebody did something that was unusual. Mm-hmm. Like with some of the papers, you see, I was really quite crazy, you might say. Mm-hmm. I turned the foolscap, the big piece of paper around, so that I put the sides together and glued them together so it became a cylinder. Mm-hmm. And, what kind of nonsense is that? I said, well, we write on a flat surface and we think in a flat surface. It's time that we thought in a new way. And but people didn't really understand what I meant by a new way. And I didn't either, but I knew that the old way was not going anywhere. So the idea was we need to move in very basic ways as how we think and how we see and how we structure. And the soft control material was, a symbol as well as being a something we created that we could call an invention. And all the way through in the lab, this effort was to create symbols which were not the ordinary symbols, but symbols of loops of biological activity and moving things, loving things, things that were beautiful, and then would turn on our own, would strengthen our own capacity to see the beauty and see the movement, see life-like things. It didn't matter if they worked at the beginning, because we weren't really, we had a year and a half and only a short time and lots of money, and we just worked to find something that we didn't understand and not feel that we were constrained to doing something that was completely sensible. So we did sensible things because they were beautiful and because they were bringing us towards something new. These are musicians who were very good musicians, and we fixed up their instruments so that the person who was playing the saxophone was getting mixed into the saxophone sound images that came from other instruments. So he thought he was playing the saxophone, but in fact he was also playing with, you could say, the piano. So these are images that we were trying to, again, loop into one another.
And the musicians were just visiting musicians, or you had?
No, they were being paid, and they were good musicians, and.
So that was one of the experiments in the lab.
One of the experiments in the lab, yeah. And also to try and explore what happened when we put unusual things together.
Explain the rationale by which you decided to build a dome inside the lab, and what was the
it was an effort to explore what we could do with this hard structure, and we made it colorful. I don't remember exactly what we did with it, but we wanted to explore. I personally felt that Bucky-Fuller dome is another hard structure, sort of imitating a crystal. And that's fine, and crystals are interesting, but it was really was a contrast to what we were trying to do, rather than supporting the softness. But when you move out of hard structures, symmetrical structures, then here was one that was not quite normal, and so that helped us to move again. And it was as I recall, we put in the triangles, or in the, whatever the shape of, I think they're not triangles, the shapes of them, I think they're octagonal.
Or hexagon? Are they hexagons?
Hexagons, I don't know for sure. But in any case, that's my mind. It's just not so good at remembering things like that. It was beautiful crystal, and that was fine. But it was also in contrast to the softness, with all the things that were there. But he also was involved in making a camera which would find the corners of a room, which would find the place where the camera itself had air muscles. These are sort of balloon kinds of things, which become not cylindrical, but tubes. And the tubes shorten and enlarge, become longer in relation to instructions from the computer, which is mostly random, but in any case, these random orders were being tuned, being shaped, so that the camera would look at the corner, would find a corner and look at it and explore the corner. And Avery was a specialist in artificial limbs when he came to us, or when he and I joined forces. And so this is, I think, a remnant from his artificial limbs. But it was, the laboratory had a structure where every person was in some respects doing something that he wanted to do, rather than that it was central organized. But I and Avery actually were sort of trying to keep it from becoming ordinary. It was a hard thing to do.
Just a second. I'll just stop and just want to make sure that. Maybe you could say what that is, just so that we.
This is a. Let's see. Yeah. This is a pillow under one finger. And the pillow has...
just a second, we'll do it again, but now it has.
Okay.
Just say again what it is.
This is a hand controller, which is very heavy and awkward, because the engineer didn't have any understanding of what I mean by soft control material and light and movable things, which are, instead he made me this heavy piece that fits on a stand, and under your two fingers here, or three fingers, whatever you choose, and then your thumb is on the other one. My goodness, how uncomfortable he made it. And these pillows are important because they expand and contract under your finger so that your finger is pushed. And at the same time, they receive the information as you change the pressure you put on the pillow. So there's two things going on. One, you are pressing the pillow, and two, the pillow is pressing your finger. And this is happening simultaneously, so that it isn't first one thing and then the other. It's not like pushing a button, because it's not. When I was working at MIT with the people who are creating the satellites and the like in the beginning, before it was moved out to a secret place, I was always confounded by why would they use an ordinary typewriter as the interface with these fancy computers. There was no interaction whatsoever. And here they're just clonk, 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 and there was no way of really giving information which included more than the on-off. So the whole of the life of the computers was on the on-off basis. And this was also the digital, but I'm not going into the generality of it, the digital versus the analog. but just that it was foolish, to my mind, not to have a richer interface with. It's like having somebody extraordinarily intelligent to talk to, and you don't have a dialogue. You just are allowed to put in single words. That's stupid. But that's the way it was, because it was the old way to do things. And I wanted to leave that world and create another one, so that the intelligence of the computer could be used by the people in an interactive way. And this, we had this covered over and so on. This was the basis, these pillows was the basis of a patent. And these are pillows basically. Now it's many, many years old. So it's not in the best of condition. But it's very important, because we were able with this to make a better interface, and they had a little fan in to cool the pillows and so on. So they would expand and contract, be pillows or being just flat. And we were able to control a submarine going down a windy path where there was stones on either side. And this, of course, was on the screen. We were controlling it.
All right, let's just get the door.
I met Peter Oser, and I'm not quite sure how I was introduced to him. I know that I went to Switzerland to talk to him, and I think that someone else had talked to him about me, and so I told him that my interest was in creating machines, systems, you name it. That was not important what we were using. But I wanted to imitate biological systems with intelligent tools that we began to have through the work of Warren McCulloch and others around the world who are involved with cybernetics. That is, as I was speaking before, I was talking about how heat-seeking missiles invented by Norbert Wiener had intelligence. And now I wanted to create machines that were built around principles which were biological, the hyphen in between the two, instead of being what I call mechanical maximizing systems, mechanical muscles which could lift heavy loads and make shoes and all sorts of things that we needed, but at the same time by machine rather than by hand. So, but I wanted to go one further and say, let's make intelligent machines which are like biological machines. So we are going from stage one of cybernetics, which had primarily to do with the military and trying to create things which could be useful in a military way at the beginning, and go to intelligent machines and intelligent systems that were made of materials which could be of the kind that were soft and had capacities of expanding and contracting and being like biological systems. They were to be able to transform on many parameters, many directions. Instead of there's just a joint and when I was at NI, when I was at NASA, I helped with the problem of how do we make a robot that would move like exactly imitating the man in space. And that required very simple points which were light focuses, mirrors, whatever, around a joint which would go this way, which would be just the mechanical arms. I wanted to make something which was more living than that, as the ordinary machines are sort of mechanical arms. So now I wanted to make something that was more lifelike than that. And so I explained this to Peter. And somehow he got fascinated by it. And he decided, yes, okay, Warren, I will give you the money. And then to make this, and we decided I would do this project over a year and a half, and that I would have the money I needed and the help I needed, because he had ideas about how the laboratory should be. And I think I have already discussed that. So then the problem was, that's nice to talk about, but we wanted to come into the second phase of cybernetics, where we're using it as not yet a social media, but as we wanted to create something that could be a social media. Even from the beginning, it was to be something that allowed, for example, the boys or the guys who were building these satellites eventually, to think about building things which had a greater capacity to receive and send information than we had previously, including tactile information, so that we enhanced the human capacity to perceive things which you ordinarily perceive with touch. And this was all explained to what's his name? Peter, in such a way that he could understand. And then then we started to build the computer without really knowing what we're going to do with the computer, what we're going to create. And then we had all these help means, which we've discussed in terms of this last movie, the Swarf movie. And so what's the next thing?
Thinking about soft machines and soft mechanisms it's a bad word, soft mechanisms, but soft machines to the idea of soft architecture, right? How does the idea of built environment and space eventually enter this? And I'll just move something because my backpack occasionally enters the picture, so I'll just move that. And you can think about the answer. So transition from soft machines to soft buildings and soft spaces. And then we'll also eventually move to the connection with Negroponte and Kevin Lynch and all that stuff. All right, you can start. just move a little bit the close from the mic. Yeah, that was fine.
Okay, so I was very much involved with how do we create an environment which is more living, the environment itself more living and more in relation to the person in the environment, who would have the capacity to enter into a dialogue with the space that was surrounding him. And now this began with my article about sound and space, which was very popular among architects, because I was saying in that by changing actively the reflectivity, the sound reflection from the wall, that we could do that by using bubbles in the material that was, we make it cheap, we make it simple, and make it so that it can change its sound using the same materials we're using otherwise. So here, conceptually, we'd made a step. Because if we can change the reflectivity in terms of the person's need at the particular time, and he could do it very simply, then he could change the kind of sound space he was involved with, he or she was involved with. So that would make a difference to the conversation and to the experience of the space. So here we're making a space change by changing the sound, the reflectivity, the echoing or lack of echoing, and so on. I had been with the blind in an anechoic chamber where there's no reflectivity at all. And this, again, made me feel that, well, okay, it's entirely different to being in an anechoic chamber where there's no reflectivity from the walls, they're made of sponge, to a highly reflective room like a bathroom where everything is being reflected by the tiles. So let's play with that. Well, there wasn't much time for playing with that at the lab, but we brought this into focus. That's what we did. And so that article told about what we understood, the sound and space for the architects. It also, we explained to the architects that it may be true that you need to make things with bricks, but it may be true also we can make things with light materials. Instead of the bricks having to support the bricks, having to support the next bricks, and so on and so forth. That there should be another way of making structures, which was not heavy, but light, making the structures then movable. And movable without heavy machines moving them, because the heavy machines are not necessary since these are light materials. And we explored that with making this umbrella. Excuse me a minute. Finish up the buttoning.
Don't worry, it's not on the camera, so I can only see it up to here.
Okay. So that's very good. So it would be possible, and this is the bit of camera which was taken with the man who was a second in command of New York architecture, I think, whose name I don't recall at the moment. And this man who knew New York architecture very well, and who was developing a plan to make a large structure where there presently was only train tracks. I tried to convince him that it would be possible to build a structure which was not heavy, because it didn't have heavy things on top of it. Because if everything's heavy, then everything has to be heavy. But in fact, he said that was quite impossible to convince people of, because it was too much of a change. They don't understand that. They don't even understand the heavy structures. That's what he told us. So, so this was important, I think. And air structures with light plastics can be developed much further than they are at the moment. And the plastics can be changed to be much more human, pleasurable than the present plastics, because the plastics we use now are not designed for people to live inside. They begin to smell and etc., etc. So these were sort of an entry into the world of architecture.
But in terms of your institutional, I'll be a bit more hands-on because time will run out otherwise. So what about Negroponte's interest in computers? At what point did you have any influence, you think, on that, or?
No. Well, I could say that I was interested in making biological computers and biological structures and biological, creating biological imitations so that to make this new kind of reality. And he was attaching himself to IBM, where there was money and where it was not just a sort of a vague idea, and was involved with how do I use IBM computers in a way that was meaningful in creating, in doing tasks which needed to be done, rather than I was interested in a task that I needed to do. So he was finding his way where there was money and there was support. And so I didn't agree with him, but we were good friends nonetheless. And I then tried to influence him in the direction of biological thinking, which I think he listened to but wasn't terribly involved with, because it wasn't his idea of what was important.
But he co-edited a book at some point on soft architecture machines. Do you think that softness of those machines had something to do with the softness that you introduced in the article on soft architectures? Because as far as I know, that's the first time that the term soft is actually used in that discourse.
No, I think I was the one who made the soft architecture came out in the architecture machine, and I was the guy who started that.
But you think they were faithful to your original philosophy, or it became much more pragmatic, what you were saying about IBM and just the pragmatic need to get things done?
Well, there's one book which he edited, and that's probably the one you refer to.
Yeah, there was the architecture machine, and it had a sequel, the soft architecture machine. So he softened it.
Yeah.
in the second.
Well, in any case, I don't think he was faithful to my ideas, because he had no way to be faithful, because he didn't really understand what I was working at.
You can say a few words about the idea of probably didn't ask him about playfulness yet.
No.
So maybe you can say a few words that, in some films and also essays, you mentioned that from Macaulay you take the idea of playfulness and you try to incorporate this philosophy or the idea of playfulness also into various biological machines and architectures you're building. So maybe what playfulness is, why it's important, how you try to go about achieving it, and how it relates to the idea of interactivity overall.
One of the problems of creating interactive systems which are inherently complex because you have a lot of things happening in one moment. And they're not sequential, they are influencing each other at all times. Is that we don't have our own structure for that we have built up intellectually. We have a great knowledge of interactive, simultaneous behavior in relation to other behaviors of nearby systems, because we live in this kind of a world. But we haven't as yet transferred the multiplicity of behaviors which are interacting at once into a means of verbal expression. So when I'm talking about these things, I use words which people understand, but I know that if I can show these behaviors to people by making them present as an experience, then it will start to have a healing effect, you could say, or you can say a changing effect, which allows people to come closer to living systems and to appreciating that life is everywhere. And we are living in a soup of life, which includes all kinds of creatures, and you can extend it as much as you like. But it's much more than the things we can talk about in words. But our experience with this world of biological experience is one that we know very, very well. But we haven't wanted to expand it and haven't seen a desire to expand it. But now that we need to do something socially, which allows us to experience that we are not the only living creatures, but life is around us. And we depend on the life around us. Then we should be able to play with these living systems so that they become familiar to us. And once they become familiar, then we will learn how to use them in a meaningful way. A way that allows us to inform ourselves about the life around us and interest ourselves in the life process itself. So we are not sort of mechanical creatures, and yet the intelligence in the first phase was used in a mechanical way. In the second phase, it needs to be used in a way that encourages our capacity to perceive and value life itself. And that was what I was trying to do, and I am still trying to do, perhaps in a new way now, because I am trying to think even more widely, because the earth is, as I said in the film, the earth is in trouble. And we need to find a way to change ourselves so that we relate to the earth and not just to things, names of things.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can...
Making teaching machines, learning machines. And he also had a feeling for soft materials. He made diagrams of soft materials, worms that walked around the city and things like that, which, had the idea, but they weren't necessarily organized. But he thought organically, and he was a beautiful man.
And you felt you were on the same wavelength, spiritually, philosophically, politically?
Yeah, I think so. And he was playful and full energy and playfulness, because he not only was working with teaching people how to learn, he also was playing with them and making musicals and entertainment. So he was a special person, very special, and not organized in the usual way. He organized in a playful way, and he just sparkled. At the same time, as he was about as weird as you can get, but that was fine. His weirdness was playful and meaningful. He was completely obsessive.
You know what I'm saying?
He was obsessive.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, he walked around. He was sort of walking in particular patterns, and he took homeopathic pills every few minutes, it seemed to me. It may not have been every few minutes, but you take the right pill. It was like a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, The pills expand you, and the pills contract you, and so on and so forth. But he used these pills to keep him alive as he experienced it. So he was a very delightful man.
So you are working at the cutting edge of sort of biological computing, cybernetics. So you could have probably raised money if you wanted to, both from the commercial sector and the military sector. You could have had a very successful career in the established institutions like MIT, like Negroponte did, and others. Yet you decide to abandon all of that and move to Norway, pursue a very different career and lifestyle and whatnot. And clearly, there were some personal factors that explain why that happened, and we don't need to get into those. But if you can focus on the political and social and cultural forces that made you not accept the path that was so easy to accept, and yet start mingling with the sort of radical leftist groups in Norway, go to China, you chose a very different path. So if you can explain how that reasoning came about and why you did what you did, that would be very good.
That being in the United States was a very good choice. Leaving Canada, which I did first, to the United States, was important, because the life in Canada was not creative at that point at all. Living in the United States was the land of milk and honey. And people who came from outside enjoyed being in the United States. But as I lived in the United States, and I'd been to China and found China not so much of a creation as I'd hoped. In fact, it was a little move backwards in some respects and forwards in others. But to me, the control of people was disturbing after having been in the freedom of the United States and Canada. So I lived in the United States with great joy. New York was wonderful, and working in the hospital where there were many possibilities as a young doctor, an intern, was beautiful. And it was also frightening because so many people that I worked with and saw had been murdering each other and come to the hospital to be sewed up again. Including, I used to say to people, follow the red path and you'll get to our hospital. And so on. But then there came a point where I felt like, after I had done so much creative work in the United States, that when you look at the essences of the culture, that it didn't really have the qualities that I wanted. I hadn't sort of been through that stage. I'd been through enjoying the freedom and the money and all of that. So I was getting to the point that I could see in the depths of that culture was money was so powerful and people were so stuck. And I was getting so stuck. And I was doing the things I liked, and at the same time, my social life, my family life had sort of fallen apart because I'd given so much attention to everything else, and it was a painful time. In fact, when I had taken refuge with Avery and at the quarry, there was a wonderful period of exaltation. I was a hippie and enjoying myself and enjoying everything. But then the one who owned the quarry and I fell out, and we were unhappy, both of us, because of Chercher la Femme, of a young woman who I was very much in love with. And I think Avery had also cared about her. So, though that didn't come at the beginning, I had just fallen in love with this girl. Completely in love. And then that fell apart. And then the politics in the United States were politics of war. And I wanted a politics which was much more life as creative, not as killing each other. A life of where the social qualities of life were being amplified. The goodness of life was, I thought, better because it was unknown to me. But I went to Europe. Well, I go back a bit. I went to live with Bateson for a while. Basically, when Avery and I fell out and had our problems, then everything demolished. And I was quite depressed. And my life was very unhappy. And so I wrote to Bateson and said that I needed help from a new environment and a new way of being. And he managed to get money from a foundation in Sweden who supplied money to go to Hawaii. And they supplied money for me to hang out with Bateson and exchange with him. And Bateson was a man who was very kind and understanding, and his wife was as well. And we had a good time together, although I spent much of my time on the beach with the beach bums They were stealing food and so on and so forth, and I thought that was really fun. And picking fruit where we're not supposed to pick fruit. And I, at the same time, had a very nice cabin, which was an excellent place to be, except I didn't want to be there. And so I just was fed up with the United States. I won't say anything against the United States because that's not meaningful. I think many people find some good things, some bad things. But I was fed up with the bad things at that point. And so I decided I should go to Europe. I didn't know what country to go to, but I thought, well, there are countries which are much more socially advanced, where money is not the center, but the government is the center, which, of course, also has its problems. But in any case, I wanted to try something new that was real. And so I decided to go to Norway. And in Norway, I found a reality which was more to my liking, perhaps because it was different. And I was seeing another creature, as it were, the social creature, a social creature that was more benevolent and not so competitive and not so forgetful of the society of people who are without money. And I, at that point, had no money at all, because I didn't get paid when I worked at the laboratory, and I used up the capital that I did have. So I was really quite broke. And so when I came to Norway, I had to hitchhike to where I wanted to go. And I had to learn how to, my kids came over and were with me, and we had to take a trip actually to Luxembourg without any money. It was quite an experience. We hitchhiked, and we just had barely enough food, but we managed. But before we went back to Luxembourg, I took the kids to Luxembourg to get the plane back to America. We had wonderful experiences in Norway, in nature. We lived in a cave, and with the sheep, except sheep shit mostly. So we touched nature deeply, and we grabbed our way, scrubbed our way, or whatever you might call it, into feeling the natural reality, the reality of nature and its processes. And that helped me to come over my depression and come into feeling back again in life's rhythm. I was not depressed in the way of suicide or anything of that sort, but my natural energy had diminished because it was the place I was before I left America was kind of miserable. And I knew there were many people like me who were quite miserable because they had no money and because they were forced to be slaves to the system, including the rich people were slaves to the system. The system is money. And that was a mechanical system by me, not a logical, biological system. So I left the United States because I couldn't really feel the essence of biologic in the way things were running. And perhaps that was my limitation in accepting things which were quite normal. I needed to be out of the normal because I considered the normal as being much less than our potential. So I wanted to find an opening to our potential rather than a closing. the human intelligence and life quality needed to advance. And I thought that I would do better in Norway or Sweden. Ended up in Norway. So